They say her name was Mercy, a woman mocked for her size, beaten for her silence, and sold like livestock to the cruelest master in the parish. The Reverend Thaddeus Ward called himself a man of God, but his sermons were screams, and his prayers smelled like blood. They said he'd break her in a week, but they didn't understand the woman they chained. In that house of pain, Mercy learned something no preacher ever taught, that a body they called shame could become a weapon. When he dragged her to the cellar to cleanse her soul, she rose up instead, and made the devil meet his maker. Now she's gone, vanished into the swamps. Some say she died. Others say she still walks those waters, leading the lost to freedom. All they know for sure is this: the Master's prayers stopped the night Mercy answered them herself. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The moon was just a sliver when Mercy woke that day. Her back ached from the thin straw mattress that barely cushioned her large frame from the hard-packed dirt floor. She rose with practiced silence, her movements slow and deliberate. There was never enough time to ease the pain in her joints before kitchen work began. The Beaumont plantation kitchen stood separate from the main house, a brick building with a massive hearth that trapped heat like a furnace. By the time Mercy lit the cooking fires, sweat already trickled down her neck. She moved with surprising grace for someone her size, lighting candles and stoking embers in the darkness. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, hefting a cast-iron pot to the hook above the flames. Steam billowed as she added water for the morning grits. The kitchen was her domain, the one place where her size was an advantage rather than something to mock. Strong arms meant she could lift what others couldn't. Thick fingers could pluck hot pans from flames without flinching. In this space, at least, she had value, but that worth vanished whenever Mrs. Clara Beaumont entered. The mistress appeared just as dawn broke, her silhouette sharp against the doorway. Though 35, Clara dressed like someone desperate to appear younger, her morning dress pinched tight at the waist. "You've started late again," Clara said, nose wrinkling at the kitchen's smells. "The master expects his breakfast precisely at 7. Mercy kept her eyes down. "Yes, ma'am, the water's just coming to boil now." Clara circled the table, running a finger along its surface and examining it for dust. "Look at me when I speak to you." Mercy raised her eyes but kept her expression blank, the face she'd perfected over years of service. "My goodness," Clara said with a little laugh. "How do you manage to get even larger? What do you eat when no one's watching, I wonder?" "Nothing that ain't mine, ma'am." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Your size is an embarrassment to this household, a reflection of gluttony and sloth." She picked up a wooden spoon and rapped it hard against Mercy's knuckles as she worked. "Perhaps if you moved faster, you wouldn't grow so fat." Mercy absorbed the pain without flinching. The burning in her knuckles was nothing compared to what her back had endured over the years. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. When Clara finally left, Mercy returned to her cooking. The household would need eggs, grits, ham, and fresh bread. The field hands would get cornmeal mush, stretched thin as it always was. But as she worked, Mercy slipped extra pieces of salt pork into the pot meant for the fields. She tucked away corn dodgers inside her apron pocket. No one noticed when she used her size to block the view of what her hands were doing. They only saw what they expected: a fat woman moving slowly through steam and ash. By mid-morning, she managed to pass the hidden food to little Mary, a skeletal child who helped carry water to the fields. The girl's eyes widened at the offering. "Quick now," Mercy whispered. "Share with your mama." The girl vanished, clutching the bounty to her chest. Through the kitchen window, Mercy could see Master Edward Beaumont pacing the front porch. His hat was askew, his normally precise appearance rumpled. A fancy carriage had arrived earlier, men in fine suits with papers in hand. Creditors again. The master's tobacco crop had failed last season, and rumors of debt circulated among the house servants. "He drank 3 bottles of brandy last night," whispered Nate, the stable boy who came for kitchen scraps. "Threw a glass at the wall when them letters came." Mercy nodded but said nothing. A master with money troubles was dangerous. She'd seen what happened when white men felt their control slipping. They tightened their grip on the only things they could still command. The afternoon brought new tension when Mrs. Beaumont returned, this time with her prize silk dress, pale blue and trimmed with French lace. "There's a stain near the hem," Clara announced. "Prepare lye soap. I want this cleaned before the Wilsons' dinner party tomorrow." Mercy knew the delicate fabric wouldn't survive harsh lye, but contradicting the mistress would earn worse than a rapped knuckle. "Yes, ma'am. I'll tend to it right away." The lye solution bubbled in a small pot as Mercy carried it carefully up the narrow back stairs to the washing room. Her bulk filled the tight passage. She moved slowly, one hand steadying herself against the wall. She never saw little Timmy, the housekeeper's son, racing down the steps. The boy collided with her legs, and Mercy stumbled. The pot tilted. Hot lye splashed across her wrist and, worse, across the silk dress draped over her arm. The beautiful blue fabric sizzled. White spots appeared instantly where the caustic liquid touched. The damage was irreversible. Timmy fled in terror. Mercy stood frozen, watching ruin spread across expensive silk. "What have you done?" Clara's shriek came from the top of the stairs. "My dress! My dress!" Within minutes, Mercy knelt in the yard, the ruined dress laid out before her. Master Beaumont, already irritable from his morning with creditors, loomed over her while Clara sobbed dramatically. "She did it deliberately, Edward," Clara insisted. "I've seen how she looks at my nice things. Jealousy and spite." "Is that true?" Edward demanded. His breath smelled of brandy, though the sun was still high. "No, master. It was an accident. The boy—" "Blaming a child now?" Clara interrupted. "Your clumsiness has destroyed a dress worth more than you are." Edward's face darkened. "We've been too lenient with you, Mercy. Too accommodating of your condition." In the yard beyond, field hands paused in their evening return. Among them, Mercy spotted two men huddled in whispered conversation, glancing nervously toward the road that led to town and church. "Them two white boys still missing?" one asked. "The miller's son and the doctor's? 2 Sundays past now. Near the church road, they say. I heard Reverend Ward been questioning families around the county." Their voices dropped lower, but Mercy caught a final exchange. "Something evil in them woods. Or in that church." The conversation ended when Edward Beaumont's voice rose above all others. He gripped Mercy's chin, forcing her to look up at him. "I've been too soft," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You need discipline. Real discipline." A chill settled in Mercy's chest, despite the evening heat. "Tomorrow," Edward declared, "you'll be sold to Reverend Thaddeus Ward. He'll teach you humility and the value of obedience." Gasps rippled through the gathered slaves. Even Clara's sobbing stopped briefly. Reverend Ward's reputation extended beyond his pulpit. Slaves sold to him rarely appeared at church services. Those who did returned, changed. Thin, silent, eyes hollow. Mercy's bruised wrist throbbed where the lye had burned her skin. The pain seemed distant now, overwhelmed by the cold certainty of what awaited her. As sundown painted the sky blood-red behind the main house, Mercy raised her eyes to the darkening heavens. "Then let God watch what comes of it," she whispered. First light broke reluctantly over the eastern hills, casting long shadows across the dirt road. Mercy sat in the back of a wagon, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. Her stomach twisted with hunger. They hadn't allowed her breakfast before loading her like cargo. The wagon belonged to Mr. Farley, a man whose business was moving slaves between plantations and markets. His sour scent of tobacco and sweat drifted back to her each time the morning breeze shifted. He hadn't spoken 2 words to her since they'd left Beaumont Plantation. "Market day," he finally grunted over his shoulder. "Gonna be busy. Don't you make no fuss." Mercy kept her eyes on her bound hands. The burn from yesterday's lye had formed an angry red welt across her wrist. It throbbed with each jolt of the wagon over the rutted road. "Yes, sir," she whispered. The early morning mist hung over the fields they passed. Mercy had never traveled this far from Beaumont before. Every mile increased the distance between her and everything familiar. The kitchen where she'd worked since childhood, the small cabin she'd shared with 3 other women, the hidden paths through the back fields where she sometimes walked under moonlight, pretending briefly she was free. Her stomach growled loudly. "Quiet that belly!" Farley snapped. "Lord knows you got enough stored up to last a month." Mercy said nothing. She'd learned long ago that hunger was not something she could control with willpower. Her body had always been this way, storing fat like it feared starvation was coming. The other slaves called it the keeping sickness, when a body holds on to every scrap it gets. The wagon rolled into St. Landry Parish as the sun climbed higher. The market square was already filling with farmers bringing produce, craftsmen with wares, and slave traders with their human merchandise. Farley pulled to a stop near the auction block, a simple wooden platform with a post and chains. "Out," he ordered, climbing down and coming around to the back. Mercy struggled to her feet, her legs stiff from hours of sitting. Without the use of her hands, climbing down from the wagon was difficult. She stumbled on the last step, nearly falling. "Careful with the goods," a passing trader laughed. "Though there's plenty of padding there." Several men nearby joined in the laughter. Mercy kept her eyes on the ground. Farley led her to a holding pen near the auction block where a dozen other slaves waited, men and women of varying ages, all with the same empty expression. Some wore only rags. A woman with fresh whip marks across her shoulders stared at nothing. "Got a big one for you, Jenkins?" Farley called to the auctioneer. "Special sale to Reverend Ward." The auctioneer, a bald man with ink-stained fingers, looked up from his ledger. "Ward, eh? What's she done to earn that sentence?" "Ruined the mistress's fancy dress. Master wants her taught a lesson." Jenkins laughed. "Ward'll take the flesh off her, sure enough." He walked a circle around Mercy, poking at her arm and side. "Lot of extra here. Never seen one quite so large. She sick?" "Just greedy," Farley answered. "Works fine otherwise." Mercy remained silent as they discussed her like livestock. The market grew busier around them. People stopped to stare as they passed, some pointing and whispering behind their hands. A group of young white men approached the pen. "Look at the size of that one," one called out. "What do they feed her?" "She ate the last master," another joked, and they all laughed. "Probably worth more rendered down for soap than for working," a third added. Their cruelty was nothing new. Mercy had heard such comments all her life. She focused instead on the pain in her wrists, using it to anchor herself against the shame that threatened to overwhelm her. By mid-morning, more buyers had gathered near the auction block. The sales began with younger men first, strong field hands who could command higher prices. Mercy watched as families were separated, children pulled from mothers, husbands from wives. Their cries merged with the general noise of the market. Then she saw him, Reverend Thaddeus Ward. He arrived on foot, Bible clutched to his chest. His frame was gaunt to the point of skeletal, his black coat hanging from sharp shoulders. His face looked carved from pale wood, deep-set eyes burning with an unsettling intensity. Beside him walked a tall black man carrying the Reverend's bag, one of Ward's slaves, based on the iron cuff visible at his ankle. Ward spoke briefly with Jenkins, who nodded and pointed toward Mercy. The Reverend approached slowly. His gaze traveled from Mercy's feet to her face, lingering on the fullness of her body with obvious disgust. "Gluttony," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "The sin of excess, the corruption of God's temple." He tapped the Bible against his leg. "Gluttony must be purged before salvation can enter." Mercy said nothing. What could she say that wouldn't make things worse? Ward turned to his slave. "Isaiah, what do you think? Can this one be saved?" The tall man kept his eyes lowered. "With your guidance, Reverend, all can be saved." Something in his tone made Mercy look at him more closely. Isaiah was perhaps 30, with a lean, strong build and hands calloused from field work. His face bore the weathered look of someone who had endured much, but his eyes, when they briefly met hers, held something unexpected: alertness, intelligence, and perhaps a warning. Ward instructed Jenkins to bring Mercy forward for closer inspection. As she was led to the block, Isaiah moved to help her up the steps. In that brief moment, with his body blocking Ward's view, he leaned close to her ear. "He shouts when alone, "And forgets locks," Isaiah whispered, the words barely audible. Before Mercy could react, he'd stepped away, face once again an expressionless mask. Jenkins called for opening bids, but the crowd's interest was minimal. Few plantations wanted a slave whose size they saw as a liability rather than an asset. The only other bidder was a man looking for kitchen help, but he dropped out when Ward offered $5. $5 and a sermon, Ward announced, "for I shall preach this Sunday on the sin of gluttony, and this woman shall be my living example." "Sold," Jenkins declared, hammering his gavel. "To Reverend Ward for $5 and God's good word." The sky had darkened during the auction. Heavy clouds rolled in from the west, promising a storm. Lightning flickered in the distance as Ward paid Jenkins and signed the bill of sale. "Come," he instructed Isaiah, "get her in the cart. We must reach Grace Hollow before the rain." Isaiah helped Mercy down from the block, his grip firm but not unkind. As he guided her toward a small cart at the edge of the market, their eyes met again. This time, Mercy saw something clearer. Not just warning, but possibility. If he spoke true about the Reverend's habits, about forgotten locks, perhaps there might be a path where she'd thought none existed. Thunder rumbled overhead as Isaiah helped her into the cart. Ward climbed onto the seat in front, Bible still clutched to his chest. With a flick of the reins, they began moving away from the market, toward the road that led to the Reverend's plantation, a place the locals called Grace Hollow. The first heavy raindrops began to fall. Thunder crashed overhead as the cart rolled through iron gates bearing the words Grace Hollow in twisted metal. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the dirt road into thick mud that slowed their progress. Mercy held tight to the side of the cart, her wet clothes clinging to her skin. Ahead, a white chapel rose like a bony finger against the darkening sky. Its steeple pierced the storm clouds, topped by a cross that seemed to lean slightly in the wind. Around the chapel sprawled fields of withered corn, brown stalks bent and broken in patches. "The Lord tests our faith through trials," Reverend Ward announced, his voice cutting through the rainfall. "Tonight, he washes away sin with his tears." Isaiah kept his eyes forward as he guided the horse through the mud. Mercy noticed how the animal's ribs showed clearly beneath its wet hide. Like everything else at Grace Hollow, it seemed underfed and grim. The cart passed slave cabins, small windowless shacks with gaps in their walls. Few people were visible in the downpour, but Mercy felt eyes watching from the shadows. Those she glimpsed looked thin to the point of starvation. They stopped before the main house, a two-story building with peeling white paint and black shutters. Unlike the bright, noisy Beaumont house, this place had a stillness that made Mercy's skin crawl. "Isaiah, take her to the kitchen," Ward instructed as he climbed down. "Dinah will see to her." He turned his burning eyes on Mercy. "You begin your purification tonight. 3 days of fasting to cleanse your flesh of its excess. 3 days to learn gratitude for God's mercy." Mercy lowered her head. "Yes, Master." "I am not your master," Ward corrected sharply. "I am your shepherd. Your soul belongs to God, but your flesh answers to me until you learn to conquer it." He disappeared into the house, taking his Bible but leaving behind the smell of wet wool and something sour that clung to his skin. Isaiah helped Mercy down from the cart. Her legs trembled from hunger and the long journey. He led her around to the back of the house, where kitchen smoke rose from a small chimney. "Mind yourself here," he whispered as they reached the door. "The Reverend sees sin everywhere." Then louder, "Dinah! New arrival!" The kitchen door opened to reveal an elderly woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight knot. Her thin frame was wrapped in a faded dress, and her dark eyes held the flat look of someone who had seen too much suffering to be surprised by more. "Lord, have mercy," Dinah murmured, looking Mercy up and down. "Come in before you catch your death." Inside, the kitchen was spare but orderly. A pot of something thin bubbled on the stove, and bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling. Isaiah nodded once to Dinah, then left without another word. "Sit," Dinah instructed, pointing to a wooden stool. "Let me see what they've sent us." Mercy sat, water pooling beneath her on the floor. Dinah untied her wrists, clicking her tongue at the lye burn. "That needs tending," she said, reaching for a tin of salve. "Thank you," Mercy whispered. Dinah's fingers paused. First rule of Grace Hollow: no thanking. Gratitude belongs to the Reverend and the Lord. We don't thank each other for what's expected. She applied the salve gently. Second rule: silence unless spoken to. Third rule: work until you drop, then get up and work more. "What happened to the others?" Mercy asked, thinking of the empty-eyed figures she'd glimpsed in the rain. Dinah's mouth tightened. Some run. Some die. Some just fade away until there's nothing left but bones walking around. She tied a cloth around Mercy's burned wrist. "The Reverend says fat is sin made visible. He'll work it off you or beat it off. Either way, you won't keep it long." As if to confirm her words, thunder shook the house. Through the kitchen window, Mercy saw the chapel illuminated by lightning. Something about its shape, perched on a small rise with a cellar door visible at its base, made her stomach knot with dread. "He said I'm to fast for 3 days," Mercy said. Dinah nodded. "You'll work, though. Here." She handed Mercy a coarse sackcloth garment. "Change into this. Your clothes go in the washing. And this—" She passed a small cup of water. "All you get tonight. Sip it slow." Mercy changed behind a screen in the corner. The sackcloth scratched against her skin, falling like a shapeless bag to her ankles. When she emerged, Dinah was waiting with a broom. "Kitchen floor first, then the hallway. Don't go upstairs unless called. Don't speak to the Reverend unless he speaks to you. If he opens his Bible, kneel wherever you are, and keep your eyes down." Mercy took the broom and began sweeping. The kitchen was warm at least, though the smell of the thin soup made her empty stomach clench painfully. Night fell quickly. Dinah showed Mercy to a small pallet in the corner of the kitchen where she would sleep. "Safer here than in the cabins," the older woman explained. "The Reverend sometimes walks the grounds at night, looking for sinners." Just as Mercy was settling onto her pallet, a scream tore through the night, high and terrible. She bolted upright. "What was—" Dinah's hand clamped over her mouth. "Hush!" she whispered fiercely. "Don't ask! Don't listen!" But Mercy couldn't help listening. Another scream followed, then sobbing that seemed to rise from beneath the floorboards. Her eyes went to the window, where the chapel was barely visible through the rain. "The confession room," Dinah whispered, following her gaze. "Under the chapel. Stone walls. Stone floor." Her voice dropped even lower. "If I die, let it be in the open air. I won't leave my bones under this man's floor." The screaming eventually stopped. Mercy lay awake long after Dinah had curled up on her own pallet, listening to the rain and thunder. She thought of Isaiah's whispered, "He shouts when and forgets loss." A plan began forming in her mind, born of hunger and desperation. For 3 days, Mercy worked from dawn until well after dark. She swept floors, hauled water, scrubbed laundry, and polished the Reverend's boots until her fingers bled. All without food. Water came in carefully measured cups, just enough to keep her alive. Her body, used to storing every morsel, began to consume itself from within. But unlike the others at Grace Hollow, she had reserves to draw on. The rain hadn't stopped since they'd fled Grace Hollow. It fell in heavy sheets, turning the world into a blur of gray shadows and mud. Mercy and Dinah struggled through the fields of dead corn, their bare feet sinking into the sodden earth with every step. "Just a little further," Mercy urged, her arm around Dinah's thin shoulders. The old woman leaned heavily against her, breath coming in ragged gasps. They had reached the edge of the plantation fields. Before them stretched a dark line of cypress trees, their gnarled trunks rising from black water. The swamp, a place of danger and freedom both. "Can't!" Dinah coughed, her frail body shaking with the effort. "Need to rest." Mercy guided her toward a fallen log at the field's edge. The rain had soaked through their sackcloth garments, making Dinah's bones seem even more prominent beneath the wet fabric. She looked pale in the darkness, her gray hair plastered to her skull. "Just for a minute," Mercy whispered, helping the older woman sit. "We need to keep going. They'll come looking when they find—" She couldn't finish the sentence. when they found the Reverend's body crushed beneath the heavy wooden chair, when they saw what she had done. Dinah nodded weakly. "I know, child. I know." She reached up with trembling fingers to touch Mercy's cheek. "You did what had to be done, what none of us had the strength to do." Lightning flashed, illuminating the swamp ahead. The cypress trees stood like silent watchers, their Spanish moss hanging like ghostly beards that swayed in the wind. The water beneath them looked thick and dark. "Can you make it through there?" Mercy asked, eyeing the murky water with concern. Dinah's laugh turned into another coughing fit. "I'm going to die, Mercy." She said it simply, with no fear in her voice. "Been dying for years under that man's roof. Just didn't have the courage to finish it." "Don't talk like that," Mercy said fiercely. "We'll rest, then keep going. Isaiah said there's people living free in the deep swamp, maroons. They'll help us." "I'd rather choke on leaves than his prayers," Dinah whispered, her eyes fixed on the swamp. "At least out here, God can see me proper, not through that man's twisted words." The rain eased slightly, becoming a gentle patter on the leaves around them. In the distance, a bullfrog croaked, the sound echoing across the water. "We should move deeper into the trees," Mercy said, glancing back toward Grace Hollow. "No torches yet, but they would come. They would have found the Reverend by now, found the trail of footprints leading from the house." She helped Dinah to her feet, but the woman's legs buckled immediately. Mercy caught her, lifting her easily despite her own exhaustion and hunger. She carried Dinah into the swamp, carefully picking her way through the shallow water until she found a raised hummock of land beneath a massive cypress. The ground was damp but not flooded. Mercy set Dinah down gently, propping her against the tree trunk. The old woman's breathing had grown more labored, a rattling sound deep in her chest. "This is far enough for me," Dinah murmured. "Just until morning," Mercy insisted. "We'll find drier ground when the sun's up." Dinah didn't argue. She closed her eyes, her thin chest rising and falling unevenly. Mercy settled beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders to share what little warmth she could. Through the long hours of the night, they huddled together while the rain continued its gentle rhythm on the leaves overhead. Mercy didn't sleep. She listened to Dinah's breathing grow fainter, felt the old woman's body grow colder despite her efforts to warm her. Just before dawn, when the sky began to lighten from black to deep blue, Dinah stirred. "Mercy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here." Dinah's fingers fumbled for Mercy's hand. "Remember what I told you about leaving my bones?" "You're not leaving anything behind," Mercy said, but her voice cracked with the lie. "Been a slave my whole life," Dinah continued, as if she hadn't heard. "First time I feel free is now. Dying in this swamp." Her lips curved in a faint smile. Strange mercy. Her next breath came with great effort. The one after that was even harder. Then, as the first gray light filtered through the cypress branches, Dinah's breath simply slipped away. Her body relaxed against Mercy's side, her head dropping gently forward. Mercy sat very still, her arms still around the old woman's shoulders. Birds began to sing in the trees around them, greeting the new day. The rain had finally stopped. "Thank you," Mercy whispered, breaking Dinah's first rule of Grace Hollow. Then she wept, silently, her tears mixing with the raindrops on her face. When the light grew stronger, Mercy gently laid Dinah's body down. The ground was too wet and soft for proper digging, but Mercy gathered moss and leaves, creating a soft bed. She placed Dinah's body on it, arranging her hands peacefully at her sides. She covered the old woman with more moss and leaves, a shallow grave, but one made with care. From the cypress, she broke 2 straight twigs and bound them together with a piece of her sackcloth to form a small cross. She placed it at the head of the grave. "Rest in the open air," Mercy said softly. "Rest free!" She had just finished when she heard them, voices carrying across the water, men shouting, the distant baying of dogs. They were coming. Mercy looked down at her hands, stained with mud and moss. She glanced at the water around the cypress hummock, dark and deep enough to hide in. Moving quickly, she gathered handfuls of the black swamp mud and began to smear it over her skin, arms, legs, face. The mud would hide her scent from the dogs, at least for a while. The voices grew louder. Flickers of torchlight appeared between the trees, bobbing closer. Mercy could make out words now. Killed the Reverend. Devil's work. Reward for the big one. Without hesitation, Mercy slipped into the water at the edge of the hummock. She found a hollow beneath the twisted roots of the cypress tree, a space just large enough for her to fit, with her face barely above the waterline. The black mud camouflaged her skin against the dark water and root. She remained perfectly still as the torches drew closer. Through the tangle of roots, she saw men splashing through the shallow parts of the swamp, holding lanterns high. Dogs strained at their leashes, sniffing at the water's edge but confused by the overwhelming scents of the swamp. "We're losing the trail!" a man shouted, a voice Mercy didn't recognize. Another voice answered, closer. "They're here somewhere! Spread out!" Mercy didn't breathe as boots splashed just yards from her hiding place. A dog barked, excited, then whined in confusion as its nose filled with the scent of mud and rot instead of human prey. "Nothing here but gators and snakes," someone complained. "We should head back before we lose the light." "Pike wants them found," another argued. "Says the fat one's dangerous. How far could they get, especially the old woman?" Mercy pressed herself deeper into the mud as a torch passed directly over her hiding place. Light danced on the water just inches from her mud-covered face. Then it moved on. Morning fog hung low over the swamp, turning the cypress trees into ghostly shapes that loomed in the milky air. Mercy had spent the night huddled at the base of a large tree, her mud-caked skin dried and cracking. She hadn't dared move until the searchers were long gone, and even then, she'd waited hours more. Her stomach ached with hunger. 3 days of fasting at Ward's command, followed by a night of terror and flight, had left her weak. She chewed on a piece of bark, trying to fool her body into thinking food might come. The soft clinking of metal made her freeze. Someone, was moving through the shallow water nearby. Mercy pressed herself against the tree trunk, looking for a place to hide. A figure emerged from the fog. A man, tall and lean, his wrists still bound with iron chains that clinked with each careful step. His face was streaked with blood, one eye swollen nearly shut. Isaiah. He hadn't seen her yet. He moved like a wounded animal, cautious and alert despite his injuries. The chains between his wrists were broken in the middle, leaving him with iron bracelets but able to move his arms freely. Mercy could have hidden, could have let him pass, but something in his broken posture spoke to her. "Isaiah," she called softly. He spun toward her voice, nearly losing his balance. His good eye widened when he saw her mud-covered form. "Mercy?" His voice was hoarse. "They said you killed the Reverend." "I did." The words came easily, without shame or regret. Isaiah stared at her, then glanced back the way he'd come. "They're coming, not far behind." "How did you get away?" Mercy asked, still not moving from her spot. "After they found Ward's body, that overseer, Pike, he went wild," Isaiah explained, his breath coming in short gasps. "Roused all the men, even the house slaves. Said we'd hunt you down like the devil you are." He touched his swollen eye. "I spoke up. Said maybe we should wait till morning. Pike didn't like that." He held up his chained wrists. "Had me tied to a post for whipping, but he was in such a hurry to catch you that he left me with just one guard. Young boy who was more scared of the dark than of Pike." Isaiah's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "When the shots started firing, someone thought they saw movement in the trees. Everyone ran. Even the boy. I managed to break the chain on a fence post and slipped away while Pike was splitting the riders into 3 groups. Mercy studied him, looking for the lie. "Why come this way? You could have run anywhere." Isaiah took a tentative step closer. "Because you showed me something I'd forgotten." He looked down at his hands. "What it means to fight back." "Dinah died," Mercy said flatly. "In the night." Pain crossed Isaiah's face. "I'm sorry. She was a good woman." "She was." Mercy finally stood, her joints stiff. "You worked for Ward." Told him things. Isaiah didn't deny it. "I did what I had to stay alive. To keep my sister alive." His voice cracked slightly. "Ward sold her anyway, 3 months back. Said my information wasn't worth enough anymore." The fog was starting to lift, sunlight piercing through in golden shafts between the trees. Birds called in the distance, their songs echoing across the water. "I know the way to a maroon camp," Isaiah said suddenly. "Deep in the swamp, people who escaped years ago, living free. I was never brave enough to try it myself, but I've helped others. I know the path." "Why would you help me now?" Mercy asked. "Because I'm tired of being afraid," Isaiah replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "Tired of betraying my own people to save my skin. What you did to Ward—" He shook his head in wonder. "No one ever dared. Not ever." Mercy considered him. She had no reason to trust this man. But she also had no knowledge of the swamp, no idea which direction might lead to safety rather than to the search parties combing the area for— "If you're lying," she said finally, "I'll kill you like I killed him." Isaiah nodded solemnly. "Fair enough." He showed her how to find lily roots buried in the mud, their starchy flesh bitter but filling. They moved deeper into the swamp, Isaiah leading the way through channels of water that seemed indistinguishable from one another. He showed her where to step to avoid sinking into mud that could swallow a person whole. For the next 3 days, they waded and crawled, living on lily roots and hush, sleeping in turns beneath canted stars. The search parties seemed to fade behind them, though twice they had to hide as riders passed nearby, torches flickering through the trees. Isaiah spoke little, but what he did say painted a clear picture of life at Grace Hollow after Mercy had been purchased. Ward's cruelty had worsened in recent months. The disappearances had increased. Slaves who failed to meet his standards simply vanished after being taken to the confession room, the same room where Mercy had ended his life. He believed he was doing God's work, Isaiah explained one night as they huddled on a small rise of dry land. Said he was saving our souls by breaking our bodies. God had nothing to do with that man, Mercy replied. By the third night, they had reached higher ground, a long, narrow ridge that rose above the swamp waters, covered with oak trees instead of cypress. Isaiah said it was a sign they were getting close to the maroon camp. Just one more day's journey, and they might find safety. Mercy slept deeply that night, exhaustion finally overcoming her constant vigilance. The ground beneath her was almost dry, a luxury after days of perpetual dampness. The air was cooler too, with a breeze that kept the mosquitoes at bay. She was dreaming of the Beaumont kitchen, of kneading bread dough with hands that had never known chains, when Isaiah shook her awake. His face was tense in the dim light of pre-dawn. "Dogs," he whispered, "closer." Mercy sat up immediately, fully alert. Now that she was awake, she could hear it too, the distant baying of hounds echoing across the water. The sound raised the hair on her arms, a primal fear taking root in her chest. "How far?" she asked. Isaiah shook his head. "Can't tell. Sound carries strange in the swamp, but closer than yesterday." They gathered their meager belongings, a crude knife Isaiah had fashioned from cypress wood, a pouch of lily roots, a small container of drinking water made from a hollowed gourd. "We need to move faster," Isaiah said, looking toward the direction they had been heading. "The maroon camp might be our only chance now." The dogs bayed again, the sound sending a chill through Mercy's body despite the humid air. They were being hunted like animals, and if they were caught— She didn't need to imagine what Pike would do to the woman who had killed Reverend Ward. Her back still carried the scars of far lesser offenses. Dawn broke through the trees, turning the misty swamp into a golden realm of light and shadow. Mercy and Isaiah had been walking since before first light, pushing forward despite exhaustion. The dogs' baying had faded as they'd moved deeper into unfamiliar territory, but fear still drove them forward. "There," Isaiah whispered, pointing ahead. At first, Mercy saw nothing but more cypress trees and hanging moss. But as they moved closer, shapes emerged from the landscape, structures so perfectly blended with the swamp that they seemed to grow from it rather than being built upon it. Huts made of woven reeds and branches formed a loose circle among the trees. Some perched on stilts above the water, others nestled against tree trunks. Vines and moss had been deliberately encouraged to grow over them, camouflaging them against the searching eyes of bounty hunters. A maroon camp, just as Isaiah had promised. "Wait," Isaiah cautioned, holding out his arm. He cupped his hands around his mouth and made a soft call that mimicked a mourning dove. After a moment, an answering call came from within the camp. "It's safe," he said. As they approached the nearest hut, figures emerged from doorways and from behind trees. Men and women with wary eyes and weathered faces. Some carried makeshift weapons, sharpened sticks, crude knives like Isaiah's. All wore clothes patched together from cast-offs and hand-woven materials. They looked wild and free in a way Mercy had never seen before. An elderly woman stepped forward from the largest hut. She was small but straight-backed, her gray hair wrapped in a faded red cloth. One of her eyes was milky white with blindness, but the other was sharp and alert as it assessed the newcomers. "Isaiah," the woman said, her voice raspy but strong. "We thought you'd finally run for the Florida territory." "Not yet, old Mabel," Isaiah replied. "But I've brought someone who needed shelter." Old Mabel turned her gaze to Mercy, studying her with an intensity that made Mercy feel exposed despite the mud still caking her skin. "You're the one they're hunting," Mabel stated. It wasn't a question. "The one who killed the preacher." Whispers rippled through the gathered people. Mercy lifted her chin. "I am." Mabel's face remained impassive for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across her weathered features. "Good," she said simply. "Come. Wash. Eat. Rest. The dogs won't find this place." The camp moved back to life around them. Children who had been hidden when strangers approached now peeked from doorways. A young man handed Mercy a gourd of clean water. Another offered Isaiah some dried meat. Mabel led them to a small hut near the edge of the circle. "You can stay here," she said. "It's been empty since the family who lived here headed north 3 moons ago." Inside, the hut was simple but comfortable. A raised platform for sleeping, covered with dried grasses and a worn blanket. A small hearth in the center. Clay pots and wooden tools hung from the ceiling. "Thank you," Mercy said, her voice thick with emotion. Mabel's good eyes studied her face. "We all carry our stories here," she said. "Someday you might share yours. For now, rest." After washing away days of swamp mud and changing into a simple dress offered by one of the women, Mercy felt almost human again. She stepped out of the hut into the afternoon light, watching the life of the camp unfold around her. About 20 people lived here, men, women, and a handful of children. Some had been born free in the swamp, never knowing chains. Others, like Isaiah, carried the marks of bondage on their bodies. They fished, gathered plants, tended small hidden gardens, and hunted with silent traps. Mercy found herself drawn to the central fire pit. A young woman was struggling to keep the cooking fire hot enough while also watching a toddler who kept wandering toward the water's edge. "May I help?" Mercy asked. The woman looked up with relief. "Please. I'm supposed to be cooking this fish before it spoils, but little Thomas won't stay put." Mercy knelt by the fire. With practiced hands, she rearranged the burning sticks and added smaller kindling to create a hotter, more controlled flame. "You know fires," the woman observed, catching her son before he could reach the water again. "I was a cook," Mercy replied. "Before." By evening, Mercy had helped prepare a meal for the entire camp. The people gathered around the central fire, sitting on logs and stumps, as old Mabel said a blessing that called upon ancestors rather than the God of Reverend Ward. Isaiah sat beside Mercy, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. The bruises on his face were fading, and some of the haunted look had left his eyes. "You belong here," he said quietly. "They respect you already." Mercy looked around at the circle of faces illuminated by firelight. For the first time since she could remember, no one was staring at her size, no one was mocking her. They saw only what she could do, what she contributed. For 2 days, Mercy found a rhythm in the maroon camp. She cooked, tended fires, helped gather herbs and plants with medicinal properties. The people respected her endurance and strength. When she carried water jugs that others struggled with, there were nods of appreciation rather than jeers. In quiet moments, she and Isaiah would sit on a fallen log at the camp's edge, watching the sunset filter through the cypress trees. "I've heard talk of Florida," Isaiah said on the second evening. "The Seminoles there. They take in people like us, build villages, even fight back against slave catchers." He actually smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "Maybe we could try for it, when the search dies down." For the first time since she could remember, Mercy allowed herself to imagine a future, not just survival, but life, a place to belong. But on the third morning, as dawn was just breaking, a distant sound shattered the peace. A hunting horn, blown 3 times in quick succession. Then, faintly, the baying of dogs. Old Mabel appeared at Mercy's side, moving with silent grace despite her age. "Pack light," she whispered. "Smoke the fires. They're reading our footprints on the water." The warning spread through the camp like wildfire. People moved with practiced efficiency, dousing fires, gathering essential supplies, and preparing to scatter in different directions. Old Mabel directed it all with calm authority, assigning escape routes and meeting points for later. North Path for families with children, East Creek for the strongest swimmers, West High Ground for those who can climb, she instructed. Mercy helped a mother pack food for her 2 small children, her hands moving quickly while her mind raced. The dogs were getting closer. Their baying echoed across the water, punctuated by men's shouts and the splash of horses pushing through shallow swamp. "You and Isaiah need to leave now," Old Mabel said, appearing at Mercy's side. "They hunt you specifically. Your trail puts all at risk." Isaiah nodded grimly. "South Passage, through the deep water." "But that's toward them," Mercy whispered. "They won't expect that," he replied. "And the water hides scent." Old Mabel pressed something into Mercy's hand, a small pouch on a cord. "Gree-gree, for protection." Her good eye held Mercy's gaze. "We will find each other again when the moon is full." Before Mercy could respond, a chorus of frantic barking erupted much closer than before, too close. "They've found the North Path," someone called out. "Go now," Old Mabel urged. "Everyone scatter!" The camp dissolved into controlled chaos. Mercy and Isaiah slipped away toward the south, wading into deeper water. Behind them, the last families disappeared into the swamp's embrace. They had pushed halfway across a wide, waist-deep pool when the first torches appeared between the men on horses, moving in a line, sweeping through the abandoned camp. Dogs strained at their leashes, noses to the ground. Mercy recognized the man at the center, Jonas Pike. Even at a distance, his broad shoulders and the distinctive wide-brimmed hat marked him. He sat higher on his horse than the others, surveying the scene like a general on a battlefield. "They're tracking the families," Isaiah whispered as they watched from behind a fallen tree trunk. "The children will be caught." Mercy saw it too. The dogs pulling toward the North Path where several families with young ones had fled. Pike was giving orders, pointing men in that direction. Isaiah's face hardened with resolve. "I need to lead them away." "No!" Mercy hissed, grabbing his arm. "I'm faster. I know these waters." His eyes held hers. "You keep south. Find the white cypress with the split trunk. Follow the water beyond it to the ridge." Before she could protest again, Isaiah slipped away, moving silently through the water toward the eastern edge of the camp. Mercy watched in horror as he suddenly burst from cover, splashing loudly and shouting, "Here! I'm here!" The effect was immediate. Dogs howled and lunged in his direction. Pike wheeled his horse around, shouting orders. The hunt changed course, thundering after Isaiah's retreating form. Mercy forced herself deeper into the water, moving south as Isaiah had instructed. The cool mud sucked at her feet as she found a hollow beneath cypress roots. She submerged herself until only her face remained above water, hidden by hanging moss. Minutes stretched like hours. The sounds of pursuit grew distant, then faded completely. The swamp fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional bird call or splash of fish. Then came new sounds, horses returning, men's voices. Mercy pressed herself deeper into her hiding place, breathing shallowly through her nose. Pike's voice carried across the water. "Bring him here." Through a screen of moss, Mercy could see them. Pike sat astride his horse while two men dragged a figure between them, Isaiah. His face was bloodied, his shirt torn. He stumbled but didn't fall as they forced him to his knees before Pike. "Where is she?" Pike demanded, leaning down from his saddle. Isaiah spat blood onto the ground. "Gone!" Pike struck him across the face with a riding crop. "You'll talk before we're done." "She's likely halfway to Orleans by now," Isaiah said, his voice steady despite his injuries. Pike circled him slowly on horseback. "You know what they're saying in town? That she's possessed, that the devil himself walks in that fat woman's skin." He raised his voice, addressing the men gathered around. "She killed Reverend Ward in his own church, strangled him with her bare hands during his evening prayers." Mercy bit her lip to keep from crying out at the lie. Pike continued, his voice rising with theatrical flair. "And those two white boys from the Matheson farm? The ones gone missing 2 Sundays past? Their blood is on her hands, too." Murmurs spread among the men. Some crossed themselves. "The devil in a fat woman's skin," Pike repeated, "and a $20 bounty to whoever brings her in, dead or alive." The truth hit Mercy like a physical blow. The missing boys, the ones the farmhands had gossiped about. Pike was using their disappearance to turn her into a monster, to ensure no one would shelter her. And worse, to cover whatever Ward had actually done to those children. "You're lying," Isaiah said, his voice ringing clear. "Reverend Ward was the one who—" Pike's boot caught him in the chest, cutting off his words. "Get him on a horse. We'll make an example of this one in town." They hauled Isaiah to his feet and tied his hands to a saddle horn. As they prepared to leave, Pike surveyed the swamp one last time, his eyes passing over Mercy's hiding place without seeing her. "Burn what's left," he ordered the remaining men. "Smoke the devil out." Mercy remained submerged until long after they'd gone, even as smoke began to rise from the huts of the only place that had offered her refuge. 2 nights later, Mercy stood at the edge of the churchyard in St. Landry Parish, a shawl pulled low over her face. The town had gathered for what they called justice. Isaiah stood on a wagon beneath the church steeple, hands bound, a rope around his neck. Pike addressed the crowd, spinning tales of wickedness and rebellion. The same congregation that had listened to Reverend Ward's sermons now hungered for blood. Hymns rose into the night air, drowning out Isaiah's last words. The wagon rolled forward. The rope went taut. Mercy's fingers dug into the soil at her feet, clutching mud until it oozed between her fingers like blood. "If I burn," she whispered as Isaiah's body swayed beneath the cross, "they burn." The dawn light cast long shadows across the freshly turned earth. Mercy's hands were raw and blistered from digging through the night with nothing but a broken branch and her fingers. The small mound of dirt lay hidden in a thicket behind the tanner's yard, just outside town. No marker but a single stone she'd placed at the head. "You tried to save them," she whispered, patting the earth one last time. "You tried to save me." Isaiah deserved better than this unmarked grave, but it was all she could give him now. The town had taken his body down before sunrise and dragged it to the pauper's field, but Mercy couldn't bear the thought of him lying there unmourned. So she'd made this small memorial, a place to hold her goodbye. She stood slowly, her muscles aching from the night's work. In the distance, smoke rose from chimneys as St. Landry Parish began to stir. Church bells would soon ring for morning prayers. The same church where Isaiah's body had swung beneath the steeple, the same church that would host Reverend Ward's funeral later that day. Mercy turned her back on the town and began walking, not away toward freedom, but back, toward Grace Hollow, toward the house of the man she'd killed. The parish road stretched before her, empty in the early light. She kept to the tree line, moving carefully. By midday, she'd reached a small creek where she stopped to rest. Her reflection stared back at her from the water, a face marked by exhaustion and grief. That face was too recognizable now, with Pike's lies spreading through the county. She needed to become someone else. Mercy took out a small knife she'd found at the maroon camp. With determined strokes, she began cutting away her hair, watching the dark locks fall around her. She cut until her head felt lighter, until her scalp showed in patches, until the woman in the water looked like someone she'd never met. Next, she scooped cold ashes from a long-dead campfire beside the creek and mixed them with mud. She smeared the mixture over her face and hands, working it into the creases of her skin, darkening and aging herself. From her bundle she pulled strips of cloth torn from her petticoat. Working methodically, she bound her chest tightly, compressing the fullness that marked her as a woman. The binding hurt, but the discomfort was nothing compared to what she'd already endured. Finally, she took the wash tub she'd carried from the maroon camp, a simple wooden basin that marked her new identity, a washerwoman from a neighboring estate, come to help with the funeral preparations, someone beneath notice, someone who needn't speak. By late afternoon, Mercy approached Grace Hollow from the back fields. The plantation looked unchanged. The same weathered chapel, the same drooping willows, the same cabins where enslaved people lived in fear. Only now, black ribbons hung from the porch columns of the main house, marking the Reverend's passing. She shuffled toward the kitchen yard with her head down, the washtub balanced on her hip. Two house servants eyed her as she approached. "Who sent you?" one asked, a tall woman with gray at her temples. Mercy pointed vaguely toward the east and kept her eyes lowered. She made a washing motion with her hands, then pointed to the chapel. "Another mute one," the woman sighed. "Fine. Help with the linens for the service. Then the dishes after." Mercy nodded, relieved her disguise had worked. Pike had never seen her face clearly, only her size and gender. With her body bound, her face darkened, and her hair shorn, she was invisible to him. As the household prepared for the memorial service, Mercy moved carefully through the kitchen and yard, watching. Pike strode about the property like he already owned it, barking orders and adjusting his fine black coat. The Reverend's body lay in state in the chapel, where neighbors had already begun to gather. When no one was looking, Mercy slipped away toward the stone cellar, the confession room where Ward had dragged her that fateful night. The heavy door was unlocked, Pike's carelessness a gift. She descended the worn steps into darkness. The cellar smelled of blood and mildew. Mercy lit a small tallow candle and held it high. The chair where she had killed Ward still stood in the center of the room, but her eyes fixed on something else. A small desk against the far wall, its drawers slightly open. Inside the desk, she found them. Ward's ledgers, 3 leather-bound books filled with the Reverend's cramped handwriting. Her fingers trembled as she opened the first one. Names, dates, punishments. Ward had recorded everything, every lash, every correction, every death. Some entries were marked with Bible verses, as if Scripture could justify such cruelty. The second book was worse, breeding records. Which men were forced with which women? Children born and sold. Prices paid. God's work, Ward had written at the top of each page. The third ledger made her breath catch. Financial records, payments to Pike for special services, notes about militia groups buying strong young men. And there, in entries from the previous month, references to questioning of the Matheson boys about unholy literature they'd been caught reading. The last entry about the boys simply read, "Buried Eastfield, unmarked. The Lord's justice complete." Mercy fought back bile. The boys hadn't been murdered by any devil in a woman's skin. They'd died under Ward's questioning, and Pike had helped cover it up. Working quickly, Mercy tore out key pages from each ledger. She folded the papers small and tight, then stitched them into the hem of her underskirt using a needle and thread from the desk drawer. The evidence of Ward's true nature now rode against her skin. As she finished, voices approached outside. Mercy blew out the candle and ducked behind a stack of barrels. 2 men entered, Pike and another man she didn't recognize. "This partnership continues as planned," Pike was saying. "Reverend's death changes nothing." The stranger, tall, well-dressed, with a northern accent, nodded. "The rifles move through the parish road tomorrow night, then?" "After the funeral," Pike confirmed, while the county's still distracted with mourning. Mercy remained perfectly still until they left, her mind racing. Pike wasn't just covering up Ward's crimes, he was running weapons through the parish. When the cellar fell silent again, she crept out and made her way to the kitchen. Women worked frantically, preparing food for the memorial guests. Mercy picked up a tray of cornbread and joined the flow of servants heading toward the chapel. Dusk painted the sky purple as people filled the church. Candles flickered in every window. At the front, Ward's coffin lay covered in white lilies, his face peaceful in death as it never had been in life. Pike stood near the pulpit, accepting condolences, playing the role of the grieving associate. His eyes passed over Mercy without recognition as she moved among the servants with her head bowed, her ash-darkened face just another in the crowd. She placed the cornbread on a side table and stepped back against the wall, watching. The chapel filled with the same people who had watched Isaiah hang, the same people who believed her to be a devil, the same people who had never questioned what happened in this place. As the first hymn began, Mercy's fingers found the papers stitched into her skirt, truth hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Sunday morning bells rang through Grace Hollow, their hollow bronze tones calling the faithful to worship. Mercy stood in the shadow of a magnolia tree, watching as the last mourners filed into the chapel for Ward's funeral service. Her fingers closed around a small flask of lamp oil she'd taken from the kitchen stores before dawn. The weight of it felt like judgment in her palm. The air hung thick with humidity. Sweat beaded on her forehead beneath the ash and mud disguise as she waited for the perfect moment. When the last of the congregation entered and Pike strode importantly toward the pulpit, Mercy slipped through the side door, head bowed like a servant attending to final preparations. Inside, the chapel glowed with morning light filtering through simple windows. Candles flickered at each end of Ward's polished coffin. The rich and poor of the parish sat shoulder to shoulder in the wooden pews, masters and overseers in their Sunday finest, house slaves standing against the back wall. Pike stood at the pulpit now, adjusting papers for his sermon, a black Bible open before him, the same Bible Ward had used to justify his cruelty, the same verses that had echoed in this room while Isaiah swung from a rope outside. Moving silently, Mercy began her work. She drifted between the pews as if checking that all was in order. With each step, she uncorked the flask and let oil drip in thin lines along the wooden floors and benches. No one noticed. All eyes were on Pike as he cleared his throat to begin. "Brothers and sisters," Pike's voice boomed through the chapel, "we gather today to remember a godly man taken too soon." Mercy continued her slow circuit. Drip. Along the back wall. Drip. Behind the last row of pews. Drip. Under the side benches where the wealthy plantation wives sat, with handkerchiefs pressed to dry eyes. "A man who stood against wickedness," Pike continued, warming to his performance, "who recognized the devil's work when it appeared before him." Mercy paused at the altar, letting a generous splash of oil pool near the base of the pulpit where Pike stood. From her pocket, she took Ward's silver cross, the one he'd worn while torturing those in the cellar. She'd found it on his desk during her search. With deliberate care, she placed it on the altar, its silver gleaming in the candlelight. The gesture might have seemed reverent to anyone watching, but Mercy knew different. That cross would remain when everything else burned away, evidence that God had turned his face from this place long ago. "The devil walks among us still," Pike's voice rose as he gripped the pulpit edges, "in the form of that murderous woman who took our brother in Christ, that creature who even now hides in our swamps like the serpent in Eden." The congregation murmured their agreement. Some nodded vigorously, others clutched their Bibles tighter. Mercy backed away toward the side door as Pike's sermon built to a fever pitch. Her work was complete. The oil trails formed an invisible web throughout the chapel, floor to pews, to walls to pulpit. "We must purge this evil," Pike shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. "We must cleanse our community with righteous fire." The irony of his words almost made Mercy pause. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket and withdrew a small coal she'd taken from the kitchen hearth, wrapped in a damp cloth to keep it hot without burning her. As the first notes of "Amazing Grace" began to fill the chapel, she let the coal drop onto the nearest oil trail. The flame caught instantly, a small blue tongue that raced along the floor faster than thought. Mercy slipped outside and closed the heavy wooden door behind her. With quick, practiced movements, she slid the iron bar across the main entrance, then hurried to secure the side door as well. The back door had been nailed shut years ago, Ward's precaution against slaves escaping during services. Inside, the hymn continued for several measures before the first screams began. The music faltered, dissolved into chaos. Smoke began to curl from under the doors. The pounding started. Fists on wood, bodies against the barred entrances. Mercy didn't wait to watch. She moved quickly toward the slave quarters, where confused faces peered out at the commotion. "Run," she told them, her voice rough from disuse. "The doors are open. The woods wait. Run now." She moved from cabin to cabin, unlocking each door, spreading the word. Some stared at her in shock. Others grabbed what little they had and fled immediately. A few hesitated, fear of punishment overriding the promise of freedom. "Ward is dead," she told them. "Pike burns. There's nothing to fear but staying." The chapel was fully engulfed now, flames shooting through the windows, black smoke billowing toward heaven like a final, desperate prayer. The screams had quieted. In the confusion, no one noticed Mercy approaching a mule cart parked near the kitchen yard, the northern trader's transportation. The man himself stood transfixed by the burning chapel, his face a mask of shock. He turned as Mercy approached, recognition slowly dawning in his eyes. "You're the one they hunt," he said quietly. Not an accusation, a statement. Mercy studied his face. "And you're no traitor." A flicker of alarm crossed his features before he composed himself. "What makes you say that?" "Traitors don't discuss rifle shipments with men like Pike," she said. "Yankees might." The man's shoulders tensed, but he didn't deny it. Mercy reached into her skirt and withdrew the folded pages from Ward's ledgers, the evidence of atrocities, the proof of Pike's conspiracy. "Ride east," she said, pressing the papers into his hand. "Put this in any Yankee hand that will take it. Show them what happened here. What men like Ward did in God's name." He hesitated only a moment before tucking the papers inside his coat. "They'll hunt you harder now," he said. "After this. Let them try." Mercy stepped back. "The swamp knows me better than they do." The man nodded once, then jumped onto his cart and snapped the reins. The mule lurched forward, clattering down the drive away from the inferno. Behind him, the chapel's roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a fountain of sparks into the morning sky. The heat was unbearable now, even from a distance. Mercy watched as flames consumed the place where so much suffering had been justified, where Isaiah's killers had gathered to mourn a monster. As the walls began to crumble, she turned away. The path back to the swamp lay open before her, a dark ribbon leading to safety. Without looking back, Mercy stepped into the tree line, leaving the destruction behind. The water welcomed her like an old friend as she waded into the familiar darkness. Behind her, firelight from the burning chapel skittered across the black water's surface, painting ripples of orange and gold that almost looked like sunrise. 3 days after the burning of the chapel, deep in the tangled heart of the swamp, where light filtered green through moss-hung cypress, Mercy sat beside a small fire. She had dug a shallow pit to keep the flames low and covered it with damp palmetto fronds to smother any smoke that might rise and betray her location. The heat was barely enough to warm her hands, but she didn't dare risk more. Her feet lay bare beside her, swollen and raw. Blisters had formed and burst during her flight from Grace Hollow, and now the open sores stung in the damp air. She tore a strip of cloth from her underskirt and wrapped it carefully around the worst spots, wincing as the fabric touched tender skin. Water dripped steadily from leaves overhead, keeping time like a lazy heartbeat. The swamp breathed around her, frogs calling, insects humming, something large splashing in the distance. These sounds had become her comfort, her lullaby. Here, among the twisted roots and brackish pools, she was not hunted. She was home. A sudden rustling broke through the natural rhythm, too clumsy for a deer, too persistent for the wind. Mercy stiffened, her hand closing around a sharpened cypress stick she kept nearby. The rustling grew louder, accompanied now by ragged breathing and the crack of breaking twigs. She doused her tiny fire with a handful of mud, plunging her small clearing into shadow. The sounds drew closer. Mercy eased herself up, ignoring the pain in her feet, and pressed her back against a tree trunk, waiting. A small figure stumbled into the clearing. A boy, no more than 12 years old, thin as a reed and covered in scratches. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with dirt and tears. When he saw Mercy, he froze like a startled rabbit. They stared at each other in silence. The boy's eyes darted toward the path behind him, weighing his chances of escape. "You lost?" Mercy finally asked, her voice rough from disuse. The boy nodded, still poised to run. "You running?" She didn't need to specify from what. There was only one thing a child his age would be running from in these parts. Another hesitant nod. Mercy slowly lowered her stick and gestured to the space beside her extinguished fire. "Sit. You safe here." The boy didn't move at first, studying her with wary eyes. "They say there's a witch in the swamp," he whispered. "A big woman who burns folks alive." Despite everything, a small smile tugged at Mercy's lips. 3 days, and already the stories had begun. "Do I look like a witch to you, boy?" He considered this seriously, then shook his head. "You look hungry. Like me." This time Mercy did laugh, a short, rusty sound that surprised them both. "Come sit," she said again. "I got food." The boy approached cautiously, keeping a careful distance as he sank down on the opposite side of the cold fire pit. Mercy reached into her bundle and pulled out a handful of blackberries she'd gathered that morning and half a corn cake wrapped in leaves. "Eat slow," she advised, passing them over. "Stomach shrinks when you starve it too long." He needed no further encouragement, cramming berries into his mouth with desperate intensity. Juice stained his fingers and chin purple-black in the dim light. "Where you from?" Mercy asked as he ate. "Thibodeau Plantation," the boy mumbled around a mouthful of corn cake. "Cross the river." "That's far. How long you been running?" 2 nights. He swallowed hard. "Dogs almost got me yesterday. I hid in the water like a turtle till they left." Mercy nodded. Smart boy. When he'd finished eating, she used a charred stick from her dead fire to draw in the damp earth between them. "We here," she said, marking an X. "River runs this way." She drew a curving line. "You want to go north, follow the stars, the drinking gourd, and keep the river on your left hand till you reach the big fork. Then you got to cross." The boy studied the crude map with intense concentration. "What's north? More swamp." "Freedom, maybe," Mercy said. "Or just different chains, but worth trying for." "You been there? To freedom?" Mercy shook her head. "Not yet. But I heard tell of people who help runaways. Look for houses with a lantern in the window after dark, or a quilt with a star pattern hanging outside." The boy was silent for a long moment. "Could I stay with you? Just for a little while?" His voice was small. "I don't know how to live in the swamp." Mercy looked at him, really looked. His arms were too skinny, his eyes too old for his face. She saw herself in him, the child she'd been before life hardened her like cured leather. "For a while," she agreed. "I'll teach you what I know." Relief washed over his face. "What's your name?" he asked. "I'm Daniel." Mercy stared into the dead fire pit, thinking of the woman she'd once been, the cook at Beaumont Plantation, the slave sold to Reverend Ward, the prisoner who'd finally broken her chains. That woman felt as distant as the stars overhead. "Mercy died in that house," she said quietly. "The woman who walks these waters don't answer to her no more." The boy looked confused, but didn't press. Instead, he yawned widely, exhaustion finally catching up to him. "Sleep," Mercy told him. "Morning comes quick in the swamp." As Daniel curled up on a bed of moss, Mercy kept watch, listening to the night sounds that had become her language. Her thoughts drifted to Grace Hollow and what had happened there. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was how quickly her story was spreading. In slave quarters across 3 parishes, whispers passed from mouth to ear in the safety of darkness. The servants who'd fled from Grace Hollow told of a large woman who'd unlocked their cabins and pointed them toward freedom. The few survivors from the chapel fire spoke of a vengeful spirit who'd sealed their doors and disappeared into smoke. The tales twisted and grew with each telling. She became larger than life. Mama Mercy, who could walk through fire unburned. Mama Mercy, who knew the secret paths through water and vine. Mama Mercy, whose laugh rode the mist before dawn, guiding runaways to safety. Some said she was a ghost. Others believed she was an angel of judgment. The truth, that she was simply a woman who'd endured too much, was too ordinary for legend. When the first light of dawn broke through the cypress, Mercy rose quietly, careful not to wake the sleeping boy. She needed to check her snares and find fresh water. Daniel would be hungry again when he woke. She moved through the swamp with practiced ease, her broad back straight, her steps unhurried despite her painful feet. Morning fog wrapped around her like a shawl, turning her silhouette into something mythical, something more than human. For a brief moment, as she crossed a clearing, sunlight broke through the trees and caught her outline. Solid, unbroken, alive. Then the mist closed in again, and the cypress shadows swallowed her whole. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.